That's her tool. We understand.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that what they call the teacher's yardstick?
I'm muted.
Let's see. Who expecting? We got Chris.
Oh, there she is.
and, Ron. Here.
Jim said he couldn't make it, right?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. You know about Shelley?
Don't know.
Okay. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Any movement on a replacement?
No. We made a suggestion, and they thought she might have conflict.
Hmm.
That
Well,
was,
That was some time ago,
yeah,
month and a half, 2 months ago.
yeah.
I'm gonna start emailing Emily every day. Need a replacement.
Do you have any suggestions? People we could reach
I
out?
passed one on to Shelley.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm live now, so I'm not gonna mention it.
Okay.
All right, let's go.
Okay.
Oh, we're waiting.
Megan, you ready? All right,
Here we go.
4 o'clock. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the City of Hagerstown's Planning Commission meeting for October the 20th, 2021. The commissioners that are with me today are Ron Thomas on my immediate right, G. Weller on my immediate left, your right or left, whichever is backwards. And visiting us on Zoom with us is Chris Davis also. Staff that's in the room, Kathy Moore, Director of Planning and Code Administration. And we're also joined by Shelley, Shelley McIntyre. Welcome. Sorry about embarrassing you like that. But, I know joining us any moment will be Steve Bachmiller. Megan Flick is in the room, who's city planner, and Amy Haught, the administrative coordinator. So now we have to wait for Steve to show up. There he is. The first on our agenda today is Planning Commission business.
Providing some, direction to Megan on the map, yeah, put up on the screen.
Okay. All right.
No, I'm just
Okay,
not sure exactly who.
gotcha.
Ross thought may not have, so
Oh, where is it?
under planning and food, text amendments.
Yep.
2021. Back.
Here?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris, I sent out an email a little while ago that had a list of lengths of buildings. That's what I just passed out. You should have received it by email.
I did, thank you.
All right. What we did at the last meeting is we went over the first part of the miscellaneous package.
Now, help me identify which one is the miscellaneous package.
The one that is the miscellaneous package is the one that One in the title block under summary, it says minor housekeeping amendments and adjustments. Underneath of it is a large red paragraph.
Yeah, which number?
Looks like,
red
yeah.
paragraph.
Yeah, and we went over items number 1 through 7, which was what you had available to you at the time.
Okay, there it says miscellaneous. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
and then since the last meeting, we forwarded you 5 additional adjustments,
I know it. Got it.
which we sent out twice. We sent out as a separate standalone.
Let's do one at a time. I'm not gonna go searching. I got multiple copies everywhere.
Okay,
So let's do them one at a time
Mine-
and then we'll come to that one.
okay.
Okay?
So where do we want to start? You want to start with the traditional stuff first?
You lead us.
Told me it
Just
was this.
allow us to catch up to where you are.
Got it. All right, well, let's do this then. In the package that you received prior to your last meeting with cover memo, the very first page is the beginning of the traditional amendments materials. It's got changes 1, 2, and 3 all in blue.
1, 2, and 3, okay.
Got it.
Okay,
I think I got the first page. Okay. All right, here's another set of that. I guess I got it. Oh, I don't have that. What?
Staples set.
Well, that's not what he's showing.
That's the miscellaneous stuff. This is the traditional stuff.
We're gonna start with the traditional stuff. Oh, okay. I thought it was miscellaneous.
yeah, miscellaneous.
Okay.
This will all be much neater, much more organized.
The date, please.
But you
With
just-
it. That's the
Why are we
miscellaneous
looking-
package.
Yeah, but
Go to the front of this. Go to the next page.
Right.
That's where we're starting.
oh, I thought we were, okay.
It's behind the cover.
I got it. Okay. You'll bring it up here. Because I don't have
You
that.
see,
I think that's,
it wasn't
That was
safe.
last.
I think it's my house.
So I don't, they're no longer coordinated.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
if
I
there's
understand.
one- This is one.
Okay,
All right.
give you a little bit of background. We had a couple of miscellaneous things hanging out there individually, a total of 4 of them. A couple of them we did discuss. The PO, the sign materials, also the homeless shelter stuff at the last meeting. We went through what we had available to us on the miscellaneous package. What we did not get into was the package specifically for the traditional neighborhood stuff. That's what we started with today. And that's the package, that's the beginning of the package that you got at your last meeting. I just walked along and showed you all as the one that has changes 1, 2, and 3 in blue. So we can start walking through those. This package is based on us going over the ordinance and finding places where there are awkwardnesses or contradictions or conflicts that we just need to clean up in order to implement what the ordinance mostly promotes and allows a developer already to do anyway, but it pushes it to be more of the expectation. And then makes some certain adjustments where there are conflicts in the current ordinance that you can't essentially get around. So we have to adjust the ordinance accordingly. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna walk through those one by one. And there are a total of, I believe, 11 of them. There's 11.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna go through, we're gonna start with number 1, change number 1. This is in the zoning ordinance, page 4-17. And what we would propose, we don't have specific wording. We wanted to talk about this. Actually, this is more, we just haven't figured out how to squeeze it into the chart yet. Add a provision to the setback chart that for houses and subdivisions for which a development plan is approved after the effective date of the amendments, that the rear yard setback may be reduced to 20 feet for a 1-story garage L on the rear of a house. Right now you have a larger rear setback. Single family home is 35 feet in the R mod, things like that. If you force the house to comply fully with that, you're going to automatically, if somebody's going to put a 2-car garage on the back of a house for this rear access attached, you're going to end up having a 4-car parking pad leading up to the 2-car garage. That seems to be somewhat of overkill. Also, a lot of times, the developers are probably going to want some flexibility in their design. So the idea is to allow for a 1-story garage attached to the house when it's rear loading on the new subdivision on an alley, kind of similar to the examples that we saw up in Walden. Now, those that we saw for the most part were a lot closer than 20 feet because we're looking to make sure that everybody has still have 2 outdoor non-garage parking spaces on their properties. So we're not quite going as aggressive as Walden's. But what it will allow to do is to make up allow that garage to extend into some of that backyard. So you're not creating an ocean. You're actually not creating too much parking on the property. Because if they have to comply with a 35-foot setback, the parking space is typically 22, 18 feet long. A 35-foot setback is essentially 2 parking car lengths. So you're going to have a 4-car parking pad leading up to a 2-car garage if you're forcing these houses to comply with the full rear setback. Megan, if you could go to the shared. The actual shared garage. H drive. Okay, go back to planning. What we go? Thanks.
Technology.
Yeah, tell me that. Super sensitive maps. How do I convert these out to a file so I can see what these pictures on? Double click.
Oh, you need to
View.
Display. so
View.
I'm gonna read Where?
Yeah.
White space. View, okay. Okay, here we go. Okay. This is Castleton. This is not the developer we looked at. This is the one that lives literally right across the alley from. If you notice, these are attached garages on the backs of houses. These probably are set back, I'm thinking about 25 feet from the alley right away. Keep in mind, the alley right away is a street right away. The paving doesn't go right up to the property line. There's a little bit of that green space that's actually the alley right away. And the thought is that do you want to have 4-car parking pads behind an attached rear-loaded garage, or do you want to allow the garage to be closer to the street and just have 2 cars on that parking pad? I didn't trespass onto these people's property to measure, but you see they're kind of cramming 2 cars into this driveway, and that rear car is probably hanging out into the alley a little bit, is my guess.
Well, that's probably the edge of the concrete. Where the concrete goes to macadam, it might be where the right-of-way line is.
It may be,
Yeah.
yeah. So the thought was, it doesn't require them to build a 20-foot, 20 feet to the alley right away. It just gives them the flexibility to build closer than the 35 feet that the ordinance currently requires.
So they could go with double car depth
If they want to,
if
then
they want
sure.
to. Well, then that's fine.
Okay.
Now, by L, you mean there is an enclosed link to the house, between the
Yes.
house and the garage?
Yes, if you notice that example there, that is attached to the house. There's a hyphen there between the garage and the main part of the house. If it's detached, then you have standard 5-foot rear accessory structure setback. That's even far more flexible, but you're not going to get a car space. They're going to build right up to that 5-foot rear setback. You're not going to get a car parking space between the garage and the alley, but they'll still need to provide 2 off-street parking spaces regardless, and they end up being to the side of the garage perhaps.
Could I suggest that if you get this into a chart
Hmm.
and you see that you need to use the word ELL, you define what that is in definitions.
Okay. Sounds good. And just so everybody hears, in case anybody's not familiar with it, the term an L means it's basically it's an extension of a building that takes something that's normally a rectangle and makes it into an L shape.
Mhm.
Usually they're smaller additions, like a 2-story colonial house might have a 1-story addition off the back, that's called an L. So
What if they wanted to go all the way across?
I think at that point, you're starting to take up usable backyard space, and they should comply with the actual backyard, rear yard setback at that point. Because we are kind of striking a balance here between having too much backyard and then not having any backyard essentially. So,
I think that's fine and good, but sometimes you've seen developers twist your wording into something else. So you want to be clear that, and without any wiggle room of what you're trying to say.
got it.
Like the Charlton Brothers development there off of Jefferson, they have attached garages that don't go completely across.
Mhm.
You might call it an L, but what's left in the yard is very tiny.
Right.
It's most of the yard is the garage.
Right. And with the Charlton Brothers site, those lots are under width, whereas these would still comply with our minimum lot size, lot area requirements, which in the R mod is 50 feet. So if somebody puts in a 2-car garage, it's half the width of the yard. If they put a 1-car garage in, it's less than that. So,
Any concern about this one?
No,
The only thing I would be concerned with is that when you have something like that, I'd rather see a more definitive point where the actual street ends and so forth. The reason I say that is because where I lived, when we first moved in, the street ended at a certain point, and then they came along later on and widened the street, so they moved everybody's mailboxes back.
right.
And so, that created a problem because they didn't set them back and set them, straight up and down as they were, when we bought the house.
Right.
No big thing, but it's just, that you can tell where the property line is because of where the utilities are. It's underground, so that,
Right. And just so we're also clear, what we're proposing to do it this way, while it makes things more flexible, it's not as, like, what words flexible as Castleton was, but and if you remember with Castleton, there were no backyard, that I can recall, there were no backyard parking pads, or if there were few, because they went right to garages.
yeah.
Walden?
Excuse me, Walden. The alley that we walked down basically everybody was either parking parallel to the front street or they're parking in their garage. There was very little in the way of rear yard parking pads. So in that respect, we're going to be more restrictive than Walden in that we still are requiring everybody to have 2 outdoor off-street parking spaces.
Those pads in the back on the alley there were barely wide enough to park a car lengthwise, much only nose
And
nose
I think
in.
that was designed specifically to cut down and prohibit parking in the alley.
Yeah,
I think their HOA that does the enforcement there, I think it's strongly frown on somebody pulling in long ways when they're
Yeah.
apron across the back of the garage.
Yeah.
Megan, how do I get out of this without booting this out of Zoom? Up here? Okay.
Moving on to the next one.
I just want to compare the alley situation with Walden a little bit, since Ron asked about defining the backs. This is Walden Alley, or an alley in Walden, I should say. I think there you're,
You would be in the alley if you tried to park back there.
yeah, nose in, yeah.
Or no, even parallel to your garage, you would be half and partially into the alley, I would think.
I would have you hang over, yeah.
That looks like it's about 6 or 8 feet.
I think at most it's 6.
6, yeah.
And keep in mind, up in Walden, things were a little bit different because the ones that were attached to houses were still a little farther away from the alley than the detached ones. The ones that you see in the left-hand side of that photograph, the closer one, the green one, I believe is attached to a house. Whereas that blue one behind it, it's a little closer to the alley.
Oh, yeah,
That one's a detached garage.
okay.
So, but we're not looking to do this unless they still provide 2 parking spaces in their driveway. You can still do that as a detached garage. You can do it yet tomorrow. So if somebody wants to put a garage that only meets the 5-foot rear setback up against the alley, you can still do it. But we're not counting those garage spaces as parking. You would still need to provide 2 off-street parking spaces in the yard.
But if they had an alley, they wouldn't have a driveway in the front.
Yeah,
Correct. So, I mean, ultimately, what it does is it creates flexibility. It sets basic parameters that the developer needs to abide by. How they choose to want to achieve it, they'll have some flexibility to do that. They can set the garage farther back, put the parking spaces behind, where the garage doors are. If they want to put the garage that close to the street as a detached, or the alley that close as a detached garage, okay, fine, but you're still providing 2 outdoor spaces, which may end up being to the side of the garage. That way we don't get away from our premise that we've been operating off of for many years, because the garage is typically not storage bins, that you're providing 2 off-street parking spaces on your property. All right, moving on to change number 2, add a provision to the setback chart that in subdivisions for which development plan is approved, that same wording. Accessory buildings, garages may be built with a 0-foot side yard setback, provided they are constructed at the same time and attached to a garage on the adjoining lot. This would be permitted for single-family dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, and townhouses. The setback chart is very busy. Staff has not determined how this would be structured yet. This goes to the model that we saw of having a townhouse, having a little courtyard behind your house, and then you have a garage attached to the back facing the alley. Also, but it could be applied as well, the way this is written, to semi-detached houses. You could have semi-detached garages on the alley. Or if you want to allow it, single-family homes that have semi-detached garages behind them as well. Again, we're still in the situation where if you're going to do this, you still have to provide 2 off-street parking spaces. And that includes the townhouses. So this is where it's gonna be a little awkward for townhouse developers, in that you could have a house sitting right up by the front sidewalk, have a little courtyard, have your garage, but behind the garage, you're still gonna have to have two, there's gonna be no other place for it. Two off-street parking spaces, off of the alley. I know that's not the best thing, but you know the problems that we've had with parking with townhouses and stuff. I think it would be very difficult for us to be in a position to approve a development plan showing townhouses where their parking spaces are 2-car garages and then they have on-street parking out front. So what you see at,
But that problem only comes up with front loading, right?
the problem would be is if we do what we saw up at Walden, where you have townhouses and the garages are right on the alley and they don't have any on-lot parking. If those people decide to turn their garages into storage bins and not use their garages for parking, it's going to create parking problems in the neighborhood, because then they're all going to be fighting over the on-street parking. Because there's going to be no parking lots, presumably. So let me see if I can find examples here.
How wide are these lots will probably be?
They would be, I would think at least 20 feet wide.
So that's one car.
It's a 1-car garage, we'd have a parking pad next to it perhaps to make up, but
I'm thinking of one car out front.
1 car out front, yeah. Here we go.
Yeah, right now with some of the townhouse developments that are front loaded, that have a driveway and a garage, they park in the driveway and in the yard.
I saw one at Leach Acres where it's an end unit at the end of a developed piece, waiting for the adjoining piece to develop, and they're using the public sidewalk as a parking pad. Really, they're just pulling off of their driveway side piece and one the stub of the public sidewalk. But this is townhouse, rear load townhouse garages that are essentially, they're detached from the main house itself. You have a little courtyard between this and the house. They don't have outside parking pads on these lots. Your options are parking on the street, parking in your garage. And we think this is probably gonna be as big of a problem as our front loaded garages are now in townhouses. So,
Although if they don't have a front yard, because we allow townhouses to be very close, it would be a big motivator for that not to be a storage bin.
the way this is written, you can do this, but you're gonna set that garage far closer to the house and still be able to park behind that garage. And I can, actually, we don't have specific language crafted yet, but still gotta figure out how to squeeze it in. But I'm gonna need direction from you all, what you consider acceptable. Do you wanna start saying in a new development like this, if you have this type of development, that we're gonna allow the garages to be parked kind of towards the parking requirements?
No, I don't
I
think.
think that's inviting a problem,
Yeah. Because it won't be.
yeah.
Um,
But if you make the lot deep enough, you could do that and then have another, 20 feet, have, again, parking spaces behind the garage.
I'd like to see enough distance between the garage and the alley for the car.
That's where I was thinking too.
So we're getting away from having townhouses where the, let me see if I can describe it. I'm thinking out where I live off of Landis Road. Those townhouses out there, the houses are farther back. And what you have is you have 2 parking spaces nose in front of each one of the townhouses. Then you have a yard in the townhouse. And then they have a yard in the back that has no access
Yeah,
to
we
any
wouldn't
vehicles.
allow that in the city because you're backing right into the street.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So that That's not allowed, okay.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we just got to craft this in such a way where they still provide their 2 off-street parking spaces outdoors. All right, moving on to change number.
Now, keeping that picture up,
Yeah,
are we concerned about a stick of 3 for fire defense?
Could have a meeting with fire
Tomorrow.
tomorrow.
yeah. We're actually going to have a meeting with several department heads tomorrow at 11 o'clock to go over any concerns that the various agencies may have in implementing this. We don't think there's really going to be much of anything in the tax and land management code. It's mostly just interacting between the departments. For example, the city engineer's office is going to need to craft a new standard detail cross-section for what a 2-way alley is going to look like, or what alley is sufficient width. And they need to check with the fire marshal to see if the fire marshal needs to get an apparatus into that alley, how wide, and then how wide it's going to be. These are things that are not in the land management code, but they're necessary for us at the staff level to all have a complete and clear understanding on in order to move forward implementing what we're doing here. So,
But there could be some land management code issues, like if they have an issue with this.
yes,
And like having the lots front on an open space.
yeah, I kind of did everything but answer your question. It's possible that something that may come out of the meeting tomorrow may impact what we're doing. We'll see. We just aren't going to know until we have that conversation. But as far as the stick of 3, that's going to be one of the things that we're going to discuss with the fire marshal. We're thinking, or the fire chief, we're thinking that things that would allay any of his concerns are actually things that wouldn't be within the land management code, but would be adjustment, maybe local amendments to the building code, things like that, things that aren't really within for us to enforce.
Like his concerns about vinyl siding when buildings are close together. That's more of a building code issue.
That was a concern of mine, where you have the building code, and you have the land management code, and you have the fire code and everything, where all of these are with 3 different departments.
No, the
So it's
first 2
all-
are one department.
Huh?
The building code and land management code are one department.
Okay,
Moving on to change 3, that's actually along the lines of what Doug just mentioned about the issue of fire marshal and the number of units in the stick.
Yeah.
So that's going to be determined tomorrow.
And part of what we're talking about too might involve the engineering department's public way standards, which is the cross sections for alleys and
Yeah.
street widths and all that kind of stuff.
Now, in change 3, I did provide some language on that. But again, that's if they decide it's even an issue. If the fire marshal decides, or fire chief decides it's not an issue and it can be worked around with the building code, staff would recommend just leaving it as it is, allowing the developer the flexibility of going up to 8 rather than forcing them to stay at 5 if it's not a particular issue with the fire chief. Moving on to number 4, language needs to be added that exempts lots built facing open space from the provision that lots built without public street frontage cannot have houses built on them. We have a number of lots around the city that go back 100 years that do not front a street. We do not allow people to build houses on them because they're back 12-foot alleys. In some cases, the alley isn't even improved. We do have a provision in the ordinance that allows them to build a garage on them, so we don't have a regulatory taking saying, hey, you got this lot here, but you can literally do nothing with it. But there's a few of them up in the north end, a few of them in the west end, south end. They're kind of spattered all around. The thing is the way that language is written, where you can't build a house on it. If we go out and we intentionally create a subdivision that has houses that do not front a public street, like we're encouraging here to build them fronting on a park, then technically with the existing language, you can't build a house on these lots that we're creating these subdivisions. So we have to make an adjustment in order to make it essentially an exception to that. And that's what that language is there on change 4.
Now, I'm not opposed to what you're trying to do here, but I've struggled with your organization in this particular section.
Okay.
it seemed that you have some things in there that don't quite relate to something else. And this is what I wrote 2 weeks ago. Why is this in other sections under 5, minimum lot area location, lot width, and yard setback requirements? Section 5 is where am I? 421. Section 5 goes. Section 5 is
Subsection
called,
I, construction on lots that do not front public streets.
section 5 is called minimum lot area, location, lot width, and yard setback requirements.
Number 8.
And you have stuff that seems to me it's not under that title. I can no longer recreate what I was thinking, but that's my note. Why is this and other numbered sections under 5?
Okay, we have 5, minimum lot area, locational, lot width, and yard requirements. Then we have subsection A, which is the chart. Section B, which is detached garages and accessory buildings. Then moving on to C, which allows for lot averaging when you're infilling. D, projections in the yards allowing front porches or rear decks to go into setbacks. E, all public street frontages are front yards. It just tells them it all, if you're corner lot, you got 2 front yards. F is certain standards for townhouse developments. G is stacked and mansion house standards. H is the mobile home standards, and these are all mostly locational and bulk requirements. And then we get down to H is mobile homes, and then I, construction on lots that do not front public streets. That's the area, that's the section that we are looking to write an exception into. It's construction on lots that do not front public streets. On lots in residential zoning districts that do not front a public street, 1 garage, residential in size and scale shall be permitted. This is what allows somebody to build a garage on a lot that doesn't front a public street in our old neighborhoods. What I wanted to do is put just a disclaimer in that saying that if we're building these or we're designing these lots that front on the parks in new subdivisions, this provision does
I'm
not
not,
apply.
that part I said, that's fine. I
Okay.
support that. I just am struggling with why you have some of those lettered things under this title, minimum lot area, location, lot width, and yard setback
So all these
requirements.
things that I went through, A through H, you have concern that some of them probably are misplaced there.
Yeah,
Okay.
Nah.
Let's do this. That's gonna take a fair amount of effort to figure out how to reorganize that.
okay,
Put that on the list for things to look at for 2020.
okay.
And we'll address that at that time.
You have to read this a whole lot more than anybody else, so it just was just a whole lot more than, maybe it should be other location requirements, or I don't know.
We're going to start with run several pages. It's subsection 5.
Okay,
All right, got it. Also in that, moving on to change 5, one of the things I just mentioned was subsection E, all public street frontages are front yards. Of course, that raises the question of creating lots that on a public street, what's constitutes front yard. So we're adding a little additional language in there that says when a lot is approved for a development plan, approved on or after, insert date of adoption, and that does not front a public street, and the lot fronts only open space or a public park, and is vehically accessed by the rear by an alley. The lot line fronting the open space lot or public park shall be the property line to which the front setback is applied. What you're saying is your front setback is what your front of your house is facing the park. That's your front setback. Because we're not going to treat an alley as a front setback and have a 25-foot setback, applying a front setback. Your architectural front is facing the park, that's what your front setback.
And again, my same comments are, I understand that's fine.
Okay.
Should that be in 5 or should 5 be relabeled or just,
I made a note.
thank you.
Moving on to change number 6. Again, this goes to the same thing. These are really kind of things to make sure we're not creating contradictory things in the ordinance. In section K3, this is the supplementary, says structures to have access. Every dwelling hereafter erected or moved shall be located on a lot adjacent to a public street. For the purpose of this section, alleys do not constitute a public street. So we're adding language that says, notwithstanding the above, this provision shall not apply to lots created as part of the development plan approved by the planning commission after date of adoption, where the lot is intended for residential development. In other words, we know that we're creating a residential lot. The lot fronts a community open space or public park, and the rear of the lot fronts an alley owned and maintained by the homeowners association or dedicated to the city for public ownership and maintenance. Okay. So again, it's just it's existing language that we need to grant a walk around.
I apologize to the commission. I'm addressing my comments and not giving anybody else any chance. Is there anything we've gone over so far that's anybody wants to comment on that we haven't already?
The only thing I would say is if you have a development that's already been in the process of being developed, but still has lots to be developed, they are bound by the ordinance that was in effect at the time that they were approved. Is that correct?
That's correct. And in the close to 20 years I've been here, we would, with anything that's currently in development, a single family building lot or any building, residential building lots fronting on the street at this point.
Okay.
So we got away from that. Again, this provision is in there to prevent people from building houses on 100-year-old lots back in alleys,
Okay.
in 12-foot alleys in our older establishments. That's what that's intended to remedy. But we got to create a, based on the existing wording, we have to create a wall around that. Change number 7, change reference to rear yard parking being preferred to expected. This will encourage use of alleys where they already exist and give more validity to the commission's and ordinance's expectations that new subdivisions ignore historically urban character. And what that does is, if you move on to the next page, the actual proposed language, it's just it's changing one word. Item number 2, rear yard parking garages or parking pads are the expected off-street parking. It's a priority. So if somebody comes and says, I want to get a curb cut and I want to put a driveway in my front yard, even though hardly anybody or nobody on the block has one, but they have access to their alley, we can say, no, it's not.
My only comment here is that it's, again, nothing against the wording, but the reference you gave of page 4-100, subsection, whatever that was.
Actually, the subsection is left blank there for some reason.
Okay. O.1.d. And I have on page 99, but I don't know why. Sometimes my pages don't match yours. I think I got the latest copy, but doesn't matter. As you go forward in public testimony and other meetings, you might want to get that.
Right.
One other spot I noticed the page numbers didn't match mine.
But as far as the language, this is the top of page 4 now, top of page 3. You'll see, it's changing one word. So I'm assuming we're all okay with that. Moving on to change 8, provide a clear statement that traditional street layouts are the priority form of subdivision development. And this is section E2G in the subdivision and land development ordinance. And we're rephrasing the title a little bit and then changing one word. Priority designs are rectilinear street layouts with vehicle diagonal elements, etc. See subsection O below regarding alleys. And then we adjust section O, development and use of alleys encouraged, becomes development and use of alleys is the priority form of residential subdivision. And then I create some language in there to address, beef that up a little bit more. I'm not going to read it verbatim. But what this is doing is these two provisions here have been cited by engineers saying, okay, we understand that you encourage traditional design, and here, take our subdivision, our suburban design. Our existing language is just weak. So this beefs it up and tells everybody, barring something that we really need to look at specifically the site, this is the expectation.
There's some really wild site constraints.
Wild site constraints, maybe a particular property is like way out on the super fringes of the city and doing the traditional design doesn't reflect anything anywhere remotely physically near it, that kind of thing. Hickory's Crossing, New Hickory's Crossing conversations we're having, things along those lines. We're trying to write this thing to be flexible, but we're coming at it from the perspective of we're starting from the traditional, not we're trying to convince you of the traditional. On change 9, tweaking the language a little bit and requiring them to be alleys where they're going to be proposed to be generally depicted on the sketch plan. Again, a sketch plan for a subdivision is a generalized plan, although we're getting more detailed plans typically than we expect. For some reason, this particular provision was not checked in the sketch plan column. So we're adding that these items are required on the sketch plan, and we add language including, don't forget, showing the alley. Moving on to change 10, clarify that alleys to be dedicated to the city will be built to city standards without exception, but provide more flexibility for those to be retained by a homeowners association. So we have section 2, streets and alleys and attached dwellings located at intersections. We talk about, this is kind of a catch-all provision. We got a couple of semi-unrelated things in one section. But what we're doing here is streets and alleys shall be graded and surfaced in accordance with the design standards in the city engineer's public ways manual and chapter 216 of the city code or successor documents. Any alley that may be dedicated to the city for ownership and maintenance shall be constructed to city standards without exception. The construction standards for alleys that will be retained and maintained by a homeowners association shall be reviewed and approved by the city engineer for quality and durability. It's going to be maintained by the HOA, it's not the city's dime or the city's concern. So that we can look at them as long as they can show us a design that is durable, that's not going to break down anytime soon. The city engineer can approve something that's other than the city standard detail. But if you're going to expect the city to take over, if you're going to expect the city to maintain it, you're building it in city standards.
If we allow, or we have a development that has alleys maintained by HOA, is the city going to have their trash collector go down that alley?
The expectation is that it would go down the alley because the alley will be designed to be able to accommodate. I think you'll find that the vast majority of the trash collection in the city doesn't go down alleys simply because they're not big enough, don't have turning radiuses to even allow it. I don't think it's a choice, it's more just we have no alternative but that people set the trash out front because the trash trucks just can't get down the alley.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't have that problem if you're designing it to look like that.
Then why wouldn't we, if the trash trucks are gonna go down those alleys, whether it's maintained and owned by the city or the homeowners association, why wouldn't we expect that both of them would be designed to one specification so that you don't have trash trucks going down an alley and after a few years, the ones that are owned by HOAs, they're torn up, whereas the ones that are maintained by the city are properly maintained.
It gets back to public investment. because if it's dedicated to the city, ultimately the city's going to be the one repairing it. Whereas if it stays owned by an HOA, then it will be on the HOA and the property owners to put the bill for the maintenance of it. In other words, the city is not at risk by allowing them flexibility to have other designs. And ultimately, the city engineer will still have to approve it, saying, yeah, this is still good. Move forward with it.
I guess what I'm saying is if the expectation is that the trash will be picked up in the alley and the HOA doesn't maintain the alley to the standard that the collector, then the trash is going to be placed out front for pickup. How do you control that?
That would be 40 years down the road at that point. I mean, we can't plan for everything. Whatever gets built in a modern subdivision is going to have to meet the city engineer's expectations. Okay. Just allows them flexibility. The thing is with the city standard, at least as it currently is, the city standard for an alley is concrete, which is a lot more expensive than doing asphalt.
Right.
And Rodney's actually talking about maybe even loosening that up a little bit, still having a substantial cross-section requirement, but maybe not necessarily for these requiring concrete. But if concrete expectation currently stands, then the cost of construction, especially when they're widening out essentially two-way traffic, is going to cause the cost of that particular element of the development to go like this.
Sure.
So, but the thought is ultimately what it boils down to is if you expect the city to take it and ultimately expect the city to maintain it, you're going to give the city alleys that meet what we expect is going to be very long-term affordability before the city would even have to deal with it again.
So the probability is if at some point in time the HOA is going to want the city to take it over, then it best be built to city standard from the beginning. Okay.
As a matter of fact, it's even written into this way. Any alley that may be dedicated to the city for ownership and maintenance shall be constructed to city standards without exception.
Okay.
So don't build something that's less than what we want now, and then 10 years from now, you're coming in and saying, hey, city, take over our alleys.
Right. Okay.
It's not going to happen. It'll be written into the development plan in black. Number 11, specifically lay out the conditions under which lots can be created fronting open space or public parks. If you have open space requirements, and however, a lot of our developments are the threshold for being required to provide open space is actually very high in the city. Most of our developments come into density that do not require any open space. They can build every square foot for streets and stormwater management and building lots if they wanted to. But we are getting proposals for developments that are having open spaces. A number of the developments that are currently noodling ideas with us, or even to the point of submitting sketch plans at this point, are showing open spaces where the density per our ordinance does not require it. But what this really gets down to is the lots that front on parks. And that's what this red language here is at the bottom of page 4. In some cases, developers may propose open space as part of a development when it is not required above. That's all the stuff in black. Regardless of whether it is required or offered within the development plan approved after a certain date, the planning commission may approve a subdivision where a single-family, semi-detached, two-family, and townhouse dwellings on fee simple lots may be relieved of the requirement that they front on a public street, provided that 1, they front on an open space lot that is accepted by the mayor and city council as a city park or maintained in perpetuity by a property owners association consisting of all properties within the subdivision. And 2, no dwelling is more than 300 feet from a public street. We'll talk about that in a minute. And 3, parking for the dwellings is provided in the rear yards of the dwellings via an alley system. That is basically what we saw up at Walton. You know, you have the house running into the park, backing into an alley, either maintained by the city or maintained by an HOA. The variable here is, and that's where I want you to pull out this drawing here. We found this drawing as a really good example of, I'll let you get to that. As far as distances, ultimately the question is going to be is how far, if we move forward with this, how far are you comfortable with a house being away from the nearest public street? Now, this particular design here is a good example because if you look at this section of road here and here, let's see how this is rated. View on the left-hand side of the drawing as you see it on the screen.
Got a 65.
We're at 65 and 75. If you look at the section of street that has the 65 on it, that is about 600 feet long, which means the houses in the middle are about 300 feet in either direction from the two streets on either side. Now, if you go over to the one, now the question is here's a public street. This particular design has alley access in the rear, but these houses are fronting a public street. The question becomes, what is that street? You absolve of all of the infrastructure and the cost and the maintenance of creating that road and treat that as a linear park. And again, this is just, hypotheticals here.
Then the 300 feet has to block.
And again, it comes into the question of, what I'm doing is I'm asking you the question, what number are you comfortable with? In this particular example, it would work. As this is written, this particular one where the street has the number 65 on it, if that was converted to an open space, it would work because the houses in the middle are about 300 feet either direction. If you go over to the block that says 75, that block is longer. And basically the houses that are up there by the curve are about 400 feet from either the two ends of that road. If this loop was turned into a linear open space and hadn't
Right.
houses front of it.
This 300 feet came from discussion with the fire marshal or the fire chief on our trip to Pennsylvania. And he was saying that that's about as far as they can officially carry a hose from a pumper or something, a unit that is parked on McAdam, or a regular street. These have streets in front of
The question is what if
Well,
those
then-
streets were
then-
made open space?
them. Then this 300 feet has to apply.
Okay, and that's the question, is the number 300 feet something that you're comfortable with? Because when we rewrote the PUD provisions last year, we wrote this stuff already in PUD, and we used the number of 200 feet. At that time, at least the staff, and I don't think that particular number got a whole lot of attention, really, when we rewrote it at the time. But we wrote it at 200 feet for PUDs, and then that raises the question, if we're comfortable with 300 feet, we could amend the PUD thing to go to 300 feet as well, it doesn't really matter.
The 300 feet in the PUDs, we weren't talking about houses fronting on open space.
Yes, we are. Yeah, this provision is in the PUD
Okay?
Yeah.
I stand corrected.
at 200 feet.
Well,
And I'm not married to any particular number.
that was just a number that came, a technical number, that we can do 300 feet.
Okay.
So 300 feet would be, if we want to stimulate this kind of development, then we ought to stop it at 300 feet. And if it's in a PUD at 200, I'd say change it to 300.
Okay, that's fine. Is that 300 feet comfortable with everybody? Sounds like it's comfortable with the fire.
Yes,
Okay,
And then we'll stick with the 300 feet. And using this example, by the way, if that road is removed, then what would end up happening is the alley that's behind it would be widened out the width of the car space. You would have parallel parking along the alley. Because obviously that additional parking would have to go somewhere. Because the zoning ordinance requires two spaces on the lot, plus engineering requires a third. And if you get rid of that street and turn it into a open space, then that third parking space has to be met somewhere else. In this particular example, I would see that the alley that backs up to the forest pond area would just be widened out by another 7 feet. And you would make up at least half of the on-street parking that you're losing getting rid of that road back on the alley.
As well as the alley behind the houses on the other side of the street. That alley has to be brought up to the new standard also.
Mhm.
Ron, you have a question?
yeah, okay, we're talking about a distance of 300 feet for fire purposes, is that correct?
Steve, yes, Steve said that,
Lord.
Steve Ward, that
Okay.
their guys can easily, well, not easily, but reasonably haul 300 feet of hose from a pumper or from a engine to a house. So he was saying, I don't need to drive right up the front.
Right. What I'm concerned about is that when we were talking there with the fire marshal, they indicated that they place fire hydrants 1,000 feet apart. That's I thought it said 1,000 feet. Now, maybe I'm thinking of some other thing, but that would mean that
I think they're closer than that.
I thought that too, but that's what that's what's in my mind, 1,000 feet, which meant that, you would be 500, the distance would be 500 in the middle there. So that's what's kind of confusing me now. The 300 as opposed to the 500 between a source of water.
Well, I guess that needs to be double checked back with the fire marshal.
I think you're dealing with two different issues. There's a difference between the source of water and the location of the apparatus.
That's right. You could have the apparatus hooked to the hydrant and go down the street
Yes.
and then 300 feet
Well,
from there.
what I'm getting at is that we're talking about a fireman hauling a hose. And what I'm thinking is if you can't get the apparatus in there between the fire hydrant and where you want to take it, where he can start hauling the hose, then you've got 500 feet. That's what I'm getting. I'm trying to make sure that we're dealing with the same number when a fireman has to cart that hose from a source.
Let me ask Steve about that tomorrow.
Okay.
He's going to be at that meeting. I think what we're going to find is it's probably going to be a non-issue because I think the distance to a fire hydrant it's not 1,000 feet.
It's not 1,000.
Maybe
Okay.
500.
Okay.
But I think what we're going to find is his main concern is how quickly can he get a hose in front of a building
Sure.
to get a fire going. And ultimately the distance of on hydrants and stuff, that's not even in our ordinance. That's fire.
Well, the only reason I'm bringing it up because that figure kind of stuck in my mind when you start talking about 300 feet carrying the hose, and I'd rather take the opportunity and the time to double check it to make sure that the two things are synonymous.
And that would definitely happen at the very least during the plan review and development.
Okay.
So, and then keep in mind what would happen is if this block turned into a linear park, you're still going to have an alley that's 2 vehicles wide. You could still get a normal sized piece of apparatus back there. So you're still going to have a fire piece of equipment here, but you may be hauling. Sorry. So you can, you may be hauling hose here, but you're still going to have the ability to have apparatus behind the buildings.
Sure.
And the other alley.
And the other, and yes, and the other alley. That's correct.
I just don't want to get caught between two different numbers trying to service the same area.
Well, I'm sure the fire chief will be reading this closely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So what we'll do is we'll stick with the 300 then, and I'll craft together a patch as well for the PUDs that will allow us to go from 200 to 300.
Okay.
But this stuff here will get what we need to where there's no inadvertent roadblocks for somebody moving forward with a more traditional design. Now, if this was to be built in the city, what that means is it gives the developer flexibility to either build that 600-foot section of road, or maybe you might want to decide to design it in such a way where it's a linear road. Again, we're trying to provide flexibility to the developers, because anytime we try to write something too focused, it never works. So the idea is to create options, create flexibility, give them direction to what the priority is. At 300 feet, that other section of road, that third section, would still be a road. They wouldn't be able to turn that into a linear road. So, okay. So that's what we got for the traditional neighborhood stuff. Is everybody, are we okay with that at this point? Okay. Moving on. One of the things that got left carried over from the last meeting was the issue of homeless shelters. And I wasn't really well prepared to discuss it. And I suggested that we have the conversation with Kathy, who's available. So, should be in that package.
We skipped over the cemetery thing.
That was dealt with last week. Shelter stuff.
I found it.
Okay.
It's in there once you get past those plates.
Mhm.
Okay. Mayor and council have been having strategic planning sessions as well as a community survey was sent out to find out the priorities of our citizens. An issue that's rising to the top is concern about homelessness and what can we do to help with that situation. And so that is something that's being talked about with other agencies in the community, as well as possible ways we can assist with the ARPA money that we got from federal government to help with pandemic issues. Well, currently our land management code is silent on homeless shelters. And it's interpreted as only permitted as an accessory use to a church on the church property. We have a couple that are non-conforming, but Reach is probably the only one that meets that requirement of a homeless shelter that's on the same property as the church and it's an accessory use to the church. We have a couple of others that are like the Mission, Salvation Army, that are non-conforming uses. And so we thought we need to talk about the situation and what can we do that is responsive to this desire to be able to help with the situation, but also is consistent with our concerns about our neighborhoods and so forth. And so what I suggested is that we create definitions that make a distinction between homeless shelter, which is the barracks style facility that you tend to think of as a homeless shelter, and emergency transient housing. And that would be if a dwelling unit is being used on an emergency basis by folks in need, and they're living in that dwelling as a common household. In that case, it would be like any family living in a dwelling as a common household, whether they're in there in a transient basis, because we have situations anyway where people might rent a unit and after 4 months in the downtown area, they're gone. That's basically transient housing. And so we were thinking if we made this adjustment, we could provide the definition of homeless shelter, which here is suggested as a barrack-style facility for transient stays by homeless families and individuals, which is operated by a provider that is licensed, certified, or approved by a government agency, and which has agency staff on site whenever the shelter is open to clients. A homeless shelter is not emergency transient housing as defined in this article. Homeless shelters are also permitted as an accessory use to an on-site religious sanctuary. And then a definition of emergency transient housing, a dwelling unit, rooming house, or hotel used by an agency to provide emergency transient housing for homeless individuals and families, provided each dwelling unit, rooming unit, or hotel room is occupied by a family or individuals living as a common household. Emergency transient housing is not a homeless shelter as defined in this article. Emergency transient housing within a dwelling unit, rooming unit, or hotel room is permitted anywhere that type of use is permitted in the city. Now, there was an extra step that I put there for your consideration, whether we want to allow the barrack-style homeless shelter as a permitted use in, and I'm suggesting four zoning districts, special exceptions in the commercial general, special exceptions in the institutional, actually they're all special exceptions, or the industrial restricted or the industrial general. So that was one option that I laid out for you. The other option would be not to spell out the barrack-style homeless shelter as permitted use in four distinct districts, but modify the definition of homeless shelter to say that it could be homeless shelters in a barrack-style format are only permissible as an accessory use to an on-site religious sanctuary, or as an accessory use to their on-site social service provider. We had as a temporary use this past, within the pandemic timeframe, Goodwill got a temporary use approval from our department to allow for a homeless shelter on their property on Church Street, I think. So it's on site with a social service provider, because they were trying to fill a gap with the excess, except the more than usual homelessness that was going on during the pandemic, and as well as whether, I don't know if Reach was open during the height of the pandemic. So they were trying to fill a gap. So that would be another alternative. Instead of having homeless shelters approved as standalones in 4 zoning districts, expand the current interpretation, which says homeless shelters may be an accessory use to an on-site religious sanctuary, expand that to, or as an accessory use to their on-site social service provider, which does not have to be a church. So that's what we're laying out for your consideration. One being, have the land management code specifically address homeless shelters and emergency transit housing. And then how far do we want to go in terms of allowing for freestanding homeless shelters in the city? We want to keep it still as accessory use to churches and perhaps also nonprofit social service providers, or do we want to allow for it as standalone use as a special exception, such as a trip to the Board of Zoning Appeals in 4 non-residential zoning districts? And how do you feel about the ordinance making it clear that emergency transient housing is a permissible use like any other form of housing?
Since the survey was very clear that there's a problem, and there is a problem because of the pandemic and because the court systems are backed up, that's why we're all seeing a lot more homelessness and the eviction moratorium. So that's why it's a lot more evident now. Which one of those is going to be more appealing and help whenever we're in this situation again, or if it continues? Like, which one of those options are going to be less restrictive and allow for more opportunity? Because one of the things that we experience is, we've got the Dagmar that's being used as a transient emergency homeless shelter. And I don't know what exactly is going on down at the hotel on Dual Highway, the old, I don't know what it's called anymore. But that is not, that is not run by any social services. And that is absolutely transient housing, where it's families that are staying there for a short period of time and then bouncing. So I think that whatever one that we select has to be something that is going to allow more flexibility to give these individuals and their families like the opportunity to stay somewhere. So just my opinion.
So of those options, option A would be more flexible than option B.
Right. So I think that based on the survey, which was, homelessness and obviously, addiction were the top 2 concerns in our community. So we have to address that by allowing more flexibility in my mind. So I would defer to option 1.
And I would suggest, if you're thinking along option A, that we also include on the homeless shelter definition, not just accessory to churches, but also accessory to the on-site social service provider. So that not only just the church, but Goodwill or whomever could do this.
Salvation Arms Church.
Would this make the hotel on Dual Highway out of compliance in any way? Because I'd like to see that.
They wouldn't, as you said, they wouldn't be complying with, let's see, an agency is putting the folks there.
Yeah, I mean, those are temporary.
Although I don't know how we would enforce that.
Yeah, I don't either, but I'd like to be able to enforce something to stop it.
Non-conforming drop dead date. Possible.
Except how would we ever be able to enforce whether or not those people are there? Be an agency rather than they found their own way to the hotel.
Good question.
I don't
have an
know.
answer
We
to
could-
that. I'm just throwing that out as a possibility. We're looking for regulatory tools.
I would say that the agencies would be able to tell if they're a client, but You probably have to have assistance from them. I don't know. Definitely a problem though.
That property has actually been broken up into two separate entities, is that correct? They have the hotel up front and then the other part that's being used as a homeless shelter, separated.
Tell them it isn't his either.
It's a property in three
Right,
pieces.
what is this?
The conference center and the restaurant, and then two for the hotel and the tower.
Yeah.
Yeah. Three.
3 land condos there.
Oh, okay, I was thinking of the Plaza Hotel and the other attachment.
3 condos that share parking.
Okay,
So, go ahead.
I'd forgotten about the conference center up front. I was concerned about the hotel that was in the back. Well, actually, the one that you see from the front, and then in the back, that was an attachment onto the hotel. That it was being used as the homeless shelter. Is that correct?
Standalone.
Not
Standalone,
really- Not
yeah.
really a shelter, it's just folks are renting rooms by the week.
Okay,
And I don't know if it's restricted to District Tower, it might be the other part of the hotel too.
It's everywhere.
So in option A, you are defining both homeless shelter and emergency transit housing. In option B, you are just defining homeless shelter.
Next page has,
On page 2, it also.
she has both, I don't know, but it has them both.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
this is something.
It's the same definition.
This is the difference.
My package has both pages. The second page just has a definition.
Oh, it's the back of, my copy's at the back of the sign provisions. Or maybe it was the front of the sign provision, I don't know. So it's the same definition.
Right, it's the zone, it's just
That's the difference?
the table.
On A, the difference is the table as well as the definition of homeless shelter doesn't include at the end or as an accessory use to their on-site social service
Right.
provider. Which I would suggest to be the same, whichever one you went with, so that you weren't, for some reason, only saying churches could be the provider of this type of service and not also a nonprofit, non-church affiliated social service provider.
I
But
don't think it has to be just churches either.
Right. But we should have no insight. social.
So I would be fine with the changing of that. But it does have to be supervised by licensed, certified, and approved.
That's what we're saying with the fair,
Yeah,
Mhm.
but in the emergency transient, it's just a facility. Someone's, I mean, it's,
Yeah, like the Dagmar is just a facility. They're
But
not
it says
licensed.
used by an agency to provide.
typically, like the St. John's shelter, that is in a house, and it's, I think, maybe a couple of apartments. So that's functioning as an emergency transient housing situation.
but, and they are counseling and working with people to get them out of that situation.
That owns- I think they own the property, has put folks in there to help them out, and so they would have a relationship with them.
Is that happening to Dagmar also?
The Dagmar is when there's at least when the Goodwill or any other social services provider puts someone in the Dagmar, they are supervised and monitored and counseled by that agency
That's paying for the bill.
that's paying for the bill. Exactly.
But someone could go and just rent from the Dagmar to stay there.
Correct. And they do, which is exactly what's happening. Again, the social services providers also send them out to the dual highway, some, they try to avoid that. But still, like Kathy said, there's a lot of families that are renting there by the week.
Maybe this is, the concern is not valid, but if someone ends up with a building like the one out on the dual highway, I don't know what to do with this thing. I'm just gonna rent it out by the week or whatever. Just open up the doors, collect rent, go around, knock on doors every week and collect rent. What is that?
That would be a long-term stay hotel. We proposed the idea of licensing hotels because of the concern that might be turning sort of into apartments, but there was no appetite for that.
Because they don't have
They don't have.
facilities in the
Because the
room.
regular hotels did not want to be licensed.
Yeah.
The ones who weren't functioning as de facto homeless shelters.
Wait a minute.
It was something that we pitched to mayor and city council, and there was a lot of opposition, and so it was not picked up.
I didn't catch everything you just said, what the difference was.
Yeah.
Did you say all that again?
Because of concerns that we had at some facilities that were allowing, instead of being your typical sort of tourist hotel and not your typical long-term stay hotel, like say a Hilton Homewood Suite, but it's a regular hotel that's allowing itself to be used as a long-term stay. We were having some concerns with one or two facilities. And so what we were proposing, and the fire department in particular was concerned, was to license hotels so that we could have some way of ensuring it was safe if rooms that were not designed for long-term stay were being used as long-term stay. And because there was no real way of saying, we're only going to license the ones we're worried about, you had to license all of them. And so the people that we were not worried about, of course, did not want to be licensed. And so there was a lot of opposition from folks who were operating hotels in the traditional manner. And so that therefore there was not an appetite for the mayor and council to license hotels. Because there was no real way to just license, this is the problem one, so we're going to license you. You kind of had to license all hotels.
What I'm trying to get at, and there's a lot of nuances there, but what I'm trying to get at is are we going to require emergency transient housing facilities to have somehow or another those folks that are getting counseling and guidance more than just flopping? We want to get them out of that situation. Or are we just going to allow a building to just become a transient, emergency transient housing that they stay there? And there's no help, no guidance, no training, nothing to get them out.
I would defer to Kathy as far as if there's other tools within the city government, within the zoning ordinance. I think we need to be very careful because the zoning ordinance by law is designed to regulate land use. You start getting into controlling behavior of people living in those spaces, I think we start getting into dangerous territory within zoning law.
Yep.
We'd have to talk to the city attorney about that.
But we do require that in the homeless shelter, whether it is run by licensed, certified, and approved government agency.
Right, because that is really a different type of land use than people living in a house. This is, you're putting 30 or 40 strangers in a giant room and they share bathrooms and toilets and really need to have someone there supervising strangers sharing a giant room together. Whereas if you put a family on a transient basis into a house, we don't look over their shoulder if they're not transient in a house.
How do you determine, when you talk about long-term hotel or use, there were a couple of what they call long-term hotels that were built along 270, I think, in Montgomery County, that companies were used for workers who were assigned a specific area to work for a month or two. And they stayed in what they call long-term hotels.
Or extended stay.
Extended stay, yeah. So I guess my question is, how do you determine if you were trying to set an ordinance for that as opposed to a regular hotel, saying when I'm going to be to convert to an extended stay.
Yeah, our ordinance is silent on the difference between extended stay hotels and transient stay hotels.
Okay.
Typical, you're there for a weekend, a week or whatever, as opposed to you
Yeah.
might be there 2, 3, 4 months. And we do have in the city too that were built specifically to be extended stay hotels.
Yeah, I thought we had a couple here in the city. I remember them talking about doing it, but I don't remember whether they actually did it.
The other thing too, I mean, you know, in reference to the pandemic, I mean, there is such a shortage of housing, you know, because of the eviction moratorium. And so these families had, a lot of them, some of them had no choice but to stay in these other extended housing opportunities, you know, whether they wanted to or not. And Reach, you're not allowed to, you can't stay there like the whole cold weather season. You can only stay there for like 30 or days maximum, I think. There's a limit on being able to stay at that shelter.
The Reach shelter, I always thought it was even worse than that, where you went in for the night and then you had to leave.
You do,
And then
but I'm
come
just
back.
saying like the maximum amount of time, like there's like counseling,
Number of days
just,
in a row. kind of
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can only stay there for a certain period of time. And again, the social service organizations that's putting these individuals in these other hotels like the Dagmar or the one on Dole Highway, they are being, you know, counseled and, you know, given opportunities to find out the barriers as to why they don't have homes. Or, you know, again, it's not always because there's major issues, some of job loss, or which is a major issue, but it's not always kind of what you see here on the streets.
It could be involved with debt, you know,
Debt,
utility debt, so you can't
Yep.
sign up again.
What, so under emergency transient housing, we said used by an agency. Do we define what an agency is?
Not as what's in front of you.
Would that be something to think about doing? I mean,
We could. We could doodle around with that.
Dude,
I'm trying to, well, and maybe I'm making a mound out of a molehill. I don't think so, but I'm
No, you're
trying to. Thank you. I'm trying to avoid a facility that the owner of the land of the facility, it's just become a big flop house. Just stays there. Those people stay there a couple years. What are we allowing that with this?
is there a requirement that these places that say that they're an agency or a care agency be required to be registered with a health department or some agency controlled that they have to answer to?
It could be defined that way as we do with group homes. Because there is a provision in the group homes definition that talks
Yeah.
about having to be operated or owned by.
That's right, yeah.
You know,
And they.
you probably already said this when I was trying to root around for my paper, but what was the golden objective of doing this?
To have the zoning ordinance not be a barrier to agencies' efforts to help people who are in need of either emergency transient housing or temporary stay in a barrack style home or shelter. Right now, what we have are non-conforming and one that meets the code because it's on the same property as the church that runs it with accessory use. We have social service providers trying to figure out what they can do to create additional alternative facilities. And I've been hearing this and I've been thinking, oh boy, this, the zoning ordinance is gonna be a problem. We're gonna be presented at the 11th hour when we found the perfect place. We're gonna have to say,
Mhm.
well, I'm sorry to tell you, the land management code doesn't allow it.
Yeah, that would be a shame. So I think we just should define a little more of what emergency transient housing is. So what, agency that does what, the further whatever. I mean, I like that control. I like an agency doing involved. I don't want just a landlord opening up his place and renting it out once a week and collecting absorbent rents. And I mean, I don't want that. So I would like to see something that would be useful and productive to the community.
Well, let's take a look at it and bring it back.
Okay.
I hear what you're saying.
As far as the homeless shelter, I think you are getting to that.
Yeah.
In that you're finding something that takes care of immediate need as well as provide some ability to solve some people's problems. So that's,
The thing we have to keep in mind is there is nothing that would prevent a landlord from renting an apartment week by week,
Mhm.
which basically turns it into transient housing. There is no mechanism for any code that we have that prevent that, but they would be in the rental licensing program, as would this emergency transient housing because they're not owner occupants.
And if we do that, if we require like some kind of guidance in things like that, are you going to open up the like halfway houses for those that have left rehab? I mean, you don't require any kind of counseling or any kind of guidance and, in that situation. So when
It has
someone,
to be owned or operated by a government approved, licensed, certified, or whatever agency. That's what the definition is for group home, halfway house, and there's another third one.
we had talked about that and
Well,
we know
aren't
it's not happening. So,
Yeah, for the sober houses seems to be falling through a crack
right.
in the state code.
Aren't the halfway houses though, aren't they more geared towards having some people who have migrated from just out of a penal institution or something where they're actually in the process of trying to find some employment or something? That was the understanding of my definition of a halfway house.
They're typically transitional
And-
houses.
And is it being too restrictive if a home like we're talking about would be defined between someone who is, say, a person that actually needs help or counseling in one category, and somebody is just that they have lost their job and they need some place to stay until they can find somewhere to make a living? I mean, because everybody that goes to a halfway house or something is not somebody that needs counseling.
well, they might need some help figuring out what they're going to do with the rest of their life.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
do you need another job skill? How do you go about getting it? Do you need to fill out a resume? Where's your help on that? I mean,
Well,
that's counseling.
I guess I'm not, I'm going to, I mean, when you
Not
think about
drugs.
somebody that needs counseling, it's somebody that has a physical or mental situation, is a recovering alcoholic or, coming down from maybe, being addicted or something,
I
but
understand, but
yeah.
it can be bigger than that.
bigger than that.
Broader
Okay.
than that.
Our definition for group homes is fairly specific. It says a dwelling unit licensed, certified, or approved by a federal, state, or local government agency or administered by a provider which is licensed, certified, or approved by a government agency in which individuals with disabilities may be provided care or treatment in a home-like environment. The health article of the Code of the State of Maryland provides specific parameters for these different types of congregate housing, which may result in a smaller number of residents for specific facilities, and those requirements will supersede this ordinance. For the purposes of administering the land management code and consistent with state code provisions, the following maximums shall apply. An alternative living unit accommodates up to 3 residents, and is deemed a single-family residence and is allowed where single-family homes are allowed. A small group home or halfway house accommodates up to 9 residents and is deemed to be a single-family residence and is allowed where single-family homes are allowed. A large group home or halfway house accommodates 10 to 16 residents and is deemed to be a multifamily residence and is allowed where multifamily residences are allowed.
So that portion of what we're discussing is specific.
Yeah, well, what's already in the land management code
Yeah.
for group homes, based on what the state provision is for these facilities for disabled folks.
So I would then say that what we're dealing with are those people that are outside the definition of what you just read.
People who
So,
are homeless.
homeless.
For whatever reason.
Yeah, for other reasons, yes.
For whatever reason.
Yeah, that's a totally different thing.
Yeah,
But if in fact someone can just open up their doors and become a flop house,
yeah.
what are we trying to do with this then? What is the difference? If Goodwill wants to do this,
Right now, emergency transit housing could be happening. Because
what?
right now, this just formalizes it, but emergency transient housing, there is nothing in the land management code that would prevent any housing unit from becoming emergency transient housing.
All right,
As long as you're occupying it in a common household, then it would be treated like the family.
okay,
This just formalizes it. But if you wanted to be more specific about facilities that are being operated by agencies that are trying to help people who are homeless and help them find solutions so that they know they graduate from transient housing to some permanent solution somewhere.
so Goodwill could establish some building somewhere to do that, and they don't need this. Why would they have this formalized section needed? They're already allowable.
Yeah.
Or is
This
there
just
something about what zoning districts are allowable in? I'm having trouble understanding.
Instead of having it only be a zoning interpretation, it formalizes it.
Instead of interpretation, it formalizes it. That's a big difference.
Instead of it being an interpretation, it would formalize it.
And that's important to do. I mean, that's the advantage of that is,
It informs the social service providers that want to be able to help people in our community that it is permissible if they were to rent a house to put a family in it, or rent a small apartment house. Like, we have a ton of 2 and 3 unit houses around town, that they could rent that entire thing or buy it and use it as emergency transient housing. So a family would move into a unit, be there for a month, a week, 6 months, whatever, however long it would take to get back on their feet. And they would.
but
move
they
on
could
to
do that
permanent.
without this wording now.
Yeah,
So if we add this wording now, someone could, we've got 2 different ways for them to go. I just, if they can do it now, why are we doing this? That's what,
Now, if they would have to know to ask us,
okay,
or just go about their business and hope that it's not a problem.
they would ask you anyhow, wouldn't
No.
No,
they? No?
Oh,
they may ask me.
Also, interpretations are harder to defend in front of the Board of Zoning Appeals in the court. So anytime you have the opportunity to codify an interpretation actual into wording in the ordinance, it makes it that much more defensible if for some reason it should become a appeal issue.
Okay. All right, well, I've wasted enough time on this.
yeah.
So I think I'm hearing option A.
A, that's my choice.
You okay with A? Chris?
Yes,
Okay.
would that change to the homeless shelter definition to add or as an accessory use to their on-site social service provider?
Yes, I think we said that.
Yeah, I think that was the plan.
And did you want anything further done about this section about used by an agency, or leave it as is?
Yeah, well, I don't know. The word agencies applied to a lot of things. Talent agencies.
That's what they should have, is the talent agency.
Well, I mean,
Well,
Social
All right, we'll,
service.
we'll take a look at that and bring it back.
okay.
Social
Is there somebody from social services who could take a look at it? Give us some
I'm
guidance.
sorry, Chris, say it.
social services.
Somebody from
We talked
social
about-
services who could take a look.
Yeah, we talked about that, like reaching out to the homeless coalition and making sure, because there's a lot of people involved in that, so making sure that they're aware and.
Yep, we can do that.
All right. What about this other stuff,
Okay, the only thing we have.
nursing
remaining-
among damaged nonconformities?
Yeah. We already did items 1 through 7 on the miscellaneous package. The only thing we have left to discuss today are changes 1 through 12 on the miscellaneous package. I sent this out as a as a standalone Monday, and then yesterday I confused the heck out of everybody by sending a revised package that had everything together. So what we're looking at is change 8, pages 2-2 and 4-127, HDC to see consultants.
What is the top change? Read to me what,
The top is change 8, pages 2-2 and 4-127.
8.
Change 8, yes.
Or page
All of them
4.
start off with change
Page
1.
four
Yeah.
in our-
It's the one that got
Page
delivered
four.
to your house.
Page 4 of the miscellaneous packet.
Page 4.
And that is. page
All right.
four.
I don't,
Okay.
Bottom half of red.
This one came in a, it
Right.
came in a
yeah.
handout on our front porch
Yes.
Yeah,
Friday. Okay.
All right.
I dated that 10.
Got it.
10/20. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
No, that's
yeah,
right.
Okay, this is something that staff has been wanting to do for a while. It's one of those situations where it rarely pops its head, but when it does, it's a real problem. The HCC occasionally gets applications for doing demolitions. There's a variety of criteria or standards under which somebody could get approval of a demolition in the historic district. One of which is called a certificate of hardship. If you have a building that's deteriorating and you find that the numbers just don't work to rehab it, nobody's going to invest that kind of money. It provides an opportunity to demonstrate that and bring the building down. The problem is that when somebody uses that trigger to move forward with a demolition, they're the ones putting the package together. And like anybody who's going to be putting together something, they're trying to convince something of somebody of, they're going to package it in the light most favorable to them, to their interest. What we're looking to do here is that doesn't change, but what it does is it creates a list of 7 items that the applicant needs to provide for the HDC to effectively evaluate the request to see if it meets the standards for a certificate of hardship. And also it does write into there that the HDC has the authority to farm it out for independent review and analysis to make sure that the numbers are truly work. Our HDC does struggle with that from time to time. Again, we don't run into this very often, but when we do, it's a problem. So what it does is it creates a list of 7 items that the developer has to, or the person applying for the demolition permit has to provide to see if it's truly a hardship. And then also it says the HDC may provide guidance and design guidelines regarding specifics of these requirements. The HDC is authorized to contract with consultants in the field of structural engineering, property valuation, business development, and building renovation to obtain independent assessment of the accuracy and completeness of the materials submitted. Cost incurred by the city to secure these services shall be borne by the property owner. So it would be a pass through. We would let the applicant know, okay, we got the HDC decides they're going to want to get basically an independent second opinion of the materials submitted to them. We'll find out who we need to go to. We'll see what that cost is. We will inform that property owner, okay, this is going to cost $300, $500, whatever. Before we move forward, you just need to be aware of that because you're going to be absorbing it. So that way it's revenue neutral or cost neutral to the city.
Okay, but the property owner does say, I don't want to spend that money. He
But
can't
they
say,
withdraw the application and building continues to stand. until
Okay.
something else happens.
shall be warned by the property owner with approval or something. Or, I don't know. I mean, you should. I mean, he could say, I don't want to spend that money.
I could put a line in there that says if the applicant does not agree to absorb the cost, then the application is dismissed.
Okay.
Thank you for doing that, Steve.
That's your member who used to be on the
Yes,
historic
yes,
district
I
commission.
recognize where that came from.
I do have to say that during the end of my tenure, we had somebody come in that wanted to demolish a perfectly serviceable building because it needed a roof, new electric and plumbing. And if that was the standard, half of the north end would be gone.
In this page, you refer to HDC significantly throughout. Could you identify what HDC is either at the beginning or somewhere?
Actually, that is in the overall section of the ordinance, it has historic district commission parentheses HDC, so it ends up.
So it's good. All right.
It's already taken
But
care
in
of.
the blue part, you could do it.
I
Well,
can do that, yeah.
Okay.
I know you get into typing it's your own stuff, in your own language, but others
I'm in my
others have to
world
read
when
this.
I work on that ordinance.
Okay, all right. We won't go there.
And also, there's just, as related to that, there's also a little cleanup in Article 2 under the powers and duties of the HDC. We're just going to add the words evaluate and assess sites as studies. The direct studies, reports, and surveys to identify, evaluate, and assess site structure. It's enabling what we were just talking about. Okay, change number 9. Use of earth tone colors on buildings. If you notice, there's nothing proposed by staff because staff doesn't see anything wrong with it.
Can I, right above that, it says, by comparison, Gaithersburg uses a much more detailed list. See attachment for additional information.
And I didn't give you the attachment, did I?
No,
All right.
well, that could be in here. I don't know.
No, I didn't get it. Dude.
Tell Doug it's in there, see what happens.
I'll forward that to you so you have that.
You're
Actually, what I'll do
You're
is
testing me. You're testing me.
sorry, I'll make that part of the next round. I'll make sure it's an attachment to this.
Date it, please.
What's that?
Date everything.
Right.
So I know what I'm looking at.
Okay. The attachment.
So
Okay.
we had a question on that with the car wash and the blue.
Yeah. Let me give you a little bit of feedback on that. What happened with that? You probably witnessed the one time in our entire combined careers with where Kathy and I did not communicate well.
Probably not the only time.
At least the only time where they
Only one he wants to admit to, right?
or at least ones where you all directly witnessed it. I was aware that blue was on the building. There is a provision in the provision where buildings have to be finished in earth tones. It allows for accent items and stuff. In that particular case, I just viewed it as an accent item. I just let it ride. Because it wasn't the overall building, it wasn't even the majority of the building or even the majority of any one side. It's the opening or the entry or the exit into the water tunnel essentially is blue.
Mhm.
And it was a car wash, given the circumstances, I just let it ride. I guess I guess it shows an example that there is some degree of interpretation that provision is open to. But generally, staff believes that allowing buildings to be bright red, bright yellow, bright blue all over the place without any sort of controls is not good for the long-term development of the community. We believe that this is okay as it is. You witness a peculiarity in that particular case, because I was perfectly fine with it moving forward as it was, as a reviewer.
Yeah, so I'm happy to say I'm fine with this because I remember the last time we ad nauseum debated this
Yes, we did.
with
I'm
earth
part of
tone,
that.
and that is
Yeah.
why brighter colors may be used sparingly to accent architectural features and for signage was what we added.
Mm-hmm.
But we were generally fine with that whole idea for exactly the reason you just said.
I think it was at Rapid Lube, we're almost right next door to this one.
Mm.
It was a red.
Yeah, it was, yeah,
I think
that's
Rapid
right.
was
That's
one of the
when we
ones
talked
that
about.
motivated.
Right,
the
it was
change.
Jiffy
Yeah.
Lube.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, if
With the
I'm
red.
hearing correctly, we're okay with striking this one then? Because I didn't propose any changes. This is the
Yes.
existing word.
I'm fine for keeping it the way that it is.
And this
Okay.
is change 9, is that,
Change 9, yes.
okay? Yes.
Should we call it non-change 9 because I didn't
Yes.
propose anything.
Don't do that.
So we're okay with striking?
That's right.
Then you will not see that again. Number 10, Planning Commission role and sketch plan. This is embarrassing, but you all had a concern with the language. Ken just exploded on that.
It's on top.
As far as what the authority of this body is to review a sketch plan, I think Jim Stone raised some concern with the actual wording. And when I went back to try to craft something to satisfy y'all, I couldn't even remember what the issue was, to be honest with you. So what I did is I had that section. I cut it and pasted it boilerplate into that staff report for that sketch plan. And this is that language. So if you want to take a look at this and tell me what I missed, I'll have language ready. I see it wasn't a major change. It was just changing review to approve or something like that. I can have that ready for you for the next package. It's not a big deal.
I was having
I can
trouble.
remember.
I was having trouble fitting in to those three criterias, what we should do.
Okay.
Because it didn't seem like any of the three were appropriate. I think in reviewing this, one, the planning commission grants the conditional approval of sketch plan, the conditions and reasons thereof shall be stated in writing. Okay, so what happens next? Then the plan can proceed where,
Yeah,
say, okay, I didn't have that, you know, I'm stuck with one. That was all we were allowed to do was one. If the planning commission disapproves, the reason shall be stated in writing. And I have no problem with that. So now, but in all cases, there's going to be things we don't like and things we do like. So where does that go?
in one,
Okay,
so that's the conditional approval.
Right.
Three is everything looked beautiful.
Okay.
Move on.
that's
Number
right.
one is there were things we had issues with.
But we need to clarify saying, now that you've been notified of that, and may be an issue, you can move on.
Right.
Okay.
And address it and move on. Okay,
All right, I got it.
Or it'll be a problem again, it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
If it shows up again, you ignored us, it's gonna be a problem.
right.
Mhm.
All right, I can fix that, but 2 and 3 you were okay with.
When I reread this, I was fine with it. 2 and 3.
Okay. So the concern is at number 1. All right,
Because in those other two, we talk about what happens subsequently.
right. Okay, got it. All righty.
Yeah, 2 is specific.
2, if the planning commission disapproves the sketch plan, the reasons for disapproval shall be stated in writing. A reference shall be made to the specific. Should we put something in there saying the developer may not move forward with the development plan without the approval of? the sketch plan?
Actually, I don't see why they can go fix them and bring them back, can't they?
Which kicks them back to 1.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Okay,
certainly could do that.
would you want me to clarify that number 2? The developer may revise and return or something like that, but is not permitted to proceed with the
Okay, see,
existing.
one is we agree with everything. We have no problems with
So
anything.
that's,
No, we
that's
might,
great.
we,
That's 3.
conditional, so there's still
1 is
things we found.
conditional.
Okay, one is, okay, yeah, okay.
And I got your concern there.
All
That's
right.
good. Number 3 is you're just good to go.
Yep,
Number 2 is denial. Well, what happens using your thought process on number 1 could be applied to number 2? What happens
Yes.
now?
You
Right.
Go back to the drawing board.
Good, but yeah.
well, that's true for 1 too.
Now, do
But
we,
we're not granting approval.
Because you're not allowed to proceed the development plan.
Right,
Gotta do sketch plan again.
yeah,
okay,
Got
all
it.
right.
But one could go to,
1 could go on to
right,
Yeah.
as long as,
site plan.
Spelled
By
out
the
what-
statement, the conditions.
right,
Right.
right.
Okay. Got
Now,
it.
in 2, do we specify those items that we disapprove?
It'll
Because
be
they've got to
stated in
know
writing.
what they
Stated
need to
in writing.
correct.
It says it stated in writing.
Okay,
But that'll be done by staff.
all right,
Right.
okay.
We're not gonna sit here for the next 2 hours
No,
trying to find the right wording and,
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
Plus, if they were at the meeting, there'll be no surprise.
Mhm.
It will have been stated pretty strongly. If it was disapproved,
mhm,
it would be for something, no, there would be no surprises there. So the letter they got would just be formalizing what they heard.
Right. Okay. Everybody's okay with that? Then we'll move on to number 11. We're just about done. It's capping when no additional parking is required. Recent additions to very large buildings demonstrate that a large amount of area could be added to a building, yet fall under the 35% foot cap on building expansion without providing additional parking. This has shown a need to cap this provision. For example, the very large addition to the warehouse at Tractor Supply on Hopewell Road technically did not require additional parking because the addition itself was less than 35%. However, it was still an awful large addition because the building they started from was an awful large building. So what this proposal does is it caps the exemption at an addition of 20,000 square feet of new construction. If you're going over 20,000 square feet, you're providing parking for everything that you're adding at that point. And nothing prevents them, if there's unique circumstances, nothing prevents them to go to the BZA and ask for a variance if there's something odd about the site. So what we do is we change O1A2 to say existing structures or uses increased in size by less than 35% and by no more than 20,000 square feet of building area after the adoption of this article.
Okay,
And then number 12, screening and buffering of mega buildings. This was something that was brought to our attention in passing by a member of the council, asked us to take a look at it. And that is these huge warehouse buildings that we're getting and the huge mass that's involved with them. If there is a better way to screen them or somehow break them up a bit. Unfortunately, there's just no real way of doing it as far as regulating architecture like building articulation, because they are what they are. They're warehouses, they need regular footprints, they're gonna have loading docks all up and down the sod. So the only real way to deal with this is through landscaping. Our landscaping standards for this type of use, I think, are better than just about anybody else around. If you look at some other surrounding jurisdictions that have had these built recently, and you look at what we have required planting and forest con around ours, I think we beat everybody hands down. But let's face it, a 1,500 foot long building is still a 1,500 foot long building. And I think once you find, using Amazon as an example, all landscaping is new. You go back out to Amazon in 5 to 10 years, and the trees have an opportunity to start growing up. It won't look as stark as it is now. But nonetheless, a 1,500 foot long building is a 1,500 foot long building. And then we were thinking, well, what can we do to address this situation? Staff believes that this is best addressed through landscaping the mass, the length of the building, and it will be rarely used because how often do we get buildings this large? Staff will discuss with you what is the appropriate length of a building before triggering this requirement. The approach should be articulated in the sketch plan phase. Staff will have examples of building lengths for comparison at your meeting. That's the paper that I handed out. I emailed out earlier today, and I also handed out, just providing some examples of buildings around the community to kind of give you an orientation. The North Point building, the first building that was approved, Amazon, is 1,750 feet long. The Herbalife building across the street is 670, and I don't think that that one doesn't really present as being a particular problem. And most of these examples are actually outside the city. Staples on Hopewell, although that is in the city, is 1,350. And that one particularly is set well back on the road. So what I'm looking at doing is crafting some language that if a building is to be built that's over a certain length, which I think we need to discuss here, what you think is appropriate, that at the sketch plan phase, they need to come in with a plan showing additional landscaping treatments to buffer such a large building additionally from the road. As a practical matter, as an example, I'm going to require it anyway, even though it's not in the ordinance. We're currently processing a sketch plan for Kerwood, Edgewood Drive and Howell Road. I always get Oakville and Howell mixed up. The warehouse there. In that particular location, the buildings are kind of more set toward the south side of the site, and there's a lot of distance between Howell Road and where the buildings are going to be. My comments from the staff, and I don't want to get into a discussion about this, because if we start discussing it, I'm just talking procedural here as an example. I'm going to discuss it here because they really should be here if you're going to discuss it. But what I'm going to plan on doing is, in my comments in the sketch plan, I'm going to encourage that they be required to use the area along Howell Road, which is about 300 feet wide, that they really don't have any plans for forest conservation. So over time, as it grows up, the people who are going to be living on this, who live on the east side of Howell Road, when they look across the street after that grows up, they barely will see these buildings after the forest grows up. As an example, and that would address the mass of this huge building, which, given the size of what they're proposing, I'm sure will fit within whatever number you give me here.
I think it's an appropriate plan, but a number of years ago, you talked about encouraging that developer or whoever develops that to use forest conservation along Antietam Creek to create a park type setting. Are you going to be able to do both, or?
We can require them to do both, because they could always sell credit if they provide on that site for forest conservation as a means of buffering, then the ordinance actually requires them to provide. We could always enter that treated as essentially as a bank, and if the developer decides they want to sell the rights off to it to somebody else to get credit for using their forest conservation toward meeting their own, for some other development that might come down the road in the future, we could do that. It's not an either or.
The other thing is berms, a berm in there, like they did Procter and Gamble along 81 down in West Virginia.
I haven't had a chance to look at the plan yet. It literally just came in. I'm going to be reviewing the next couple of days. There may be a berm in there, but you combine a berm and forest conservation, you get even that much more buffering. So
The big building out there off of Route 11 gets near the Showalter.
That's the offender.
That's a huge one out there. How did the county handle that?
They put little trees up along the way.
Because it's far enough back off of 11 that you just see little bits and pieces of it. And then when you turn down Showalter, all you're seeing is the end part, which is not as big a footprint.
There are parts of 11 where you're seeing all of it. There's a coffee house in particular where I've noticed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And with all the jurisdictions that are up and down Route 81 and the examples that you see across 3 state jurisdictions, the landscaping standards vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. If you look close, some of them have literally nothing.
Yes.
Ours existing are probably the best that are out there, and this would even enhance that even more.
That one on off Showalter off 11 North. Of course, those houses now have this monster to look at.
Yep.
For the rest of their lives.
But it'll be buffered from roads. We're not proposing if it's adjacent to residential. We're not looking, because there's still going to be buffering requirements anyway between an industrial and a residential use. I think we're okay with that as that is.
Yeah, there's quite a distance involved between the industrial and the residential.
Yeah. So I think we're okay there. And to give you an example where we kind of informally did this is when we got the site plan for the North Point Building 2, which is you're heading down toward the mall. It's that first building that they're just now completing on the left. They're gonna have a double row of street trees.
Mhm.
And we kind of just negotiated that in because they had the space, they needed some forest con credit, so we gave them double credit for street trees because they were doing a double row of street trees. It worked out to everybody's benefit. And over time, that'll do a really good job of screening that. So what it does is, the way this is proposed, it's gonna put it back in the lap of the developer, saying, okay, your building is over X feet. You gotta tell us how you're going to do extra buffering to buffer this from a road. Put it back in the lap.
I'll be willing to go along with that approach first. I think Birmingham ought to be encouraged too. I mean, again, I'll go back to what they did along 81. I mean, unless you know Procter and Gamble's factory, you can't sit. There's one or two breaks that you can see sketches of it, but now that's a pretty good sized berm.
Do you want to actually write Birmingham's encouraged into this, or do you just want to deal with it on a case by case basis as the proposals come in?
I could
I
say
do either way.
berms could be considered, yeah.
Okay.
Give it as an example,
Yeah.
leave it up to them to be creative and come up with something.
Yeah, there's all kinds of problems putting in berms too, besides expense.
You don't want to frame it where it's a requirement that you all have to entertain a waiver
Yeah.
if somebody doesn't want to do it. The idea is putting them on notice. Hey, you got this huge building, you got to do something extra. Tell us what you're going to do.
And
What length of building do you think it should fit in? That's the big question here. At some point, you got to say, this building has to do it, another building doesn't.
750.
Up to you all.
The Amazon building is about a third of a mile long.
Yeah. That one on 11 is.
They're 111, pretty
yeah,
good size
big
too.
I think that one might be a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Amazon's
Yeah.
is taking over all that too.
And Kerwood's gonna be bigger than these.
Okay,
So,
Although it won't be running along.
that's true. It's major length is gonna be, it's gonna be parallel to the creek and set 300 feet back from Howell Road, which we can mitigate. The one that's gonna be really visible from a road is Edgewood, and that's gonna be the narrower end of it. 750, you wanna do even 1,000? I mean, it's up to you all, what you wanna do.
the dark.
And I'm kind of the same way.
Yeah.
Tell me what y'all want.
What do y'all think?
Well, you 1,000 feet, you're
Yeah, I
talking
know.
about a 20% of a mile.
I like 750.
Okay, there's two 750s.
Fine.
Okay, 750 it is. And again, how often are we gonna get,
Honestly.
how often are we gonna get buildings this large anyway? It'll be a rarely used provision,
Hope.
but necessary when
Mhm.
when it comes
Property
up.
runs out.
Yeah.
Are we gonna
To
be
the-
annexing the farm out on 40 West? The two big buildings going in out there?
If our boundary got out there.
We're not
Oh,
very close
okay,
to
we
that.
can't reach it now.
We may not see it in our lifetime.
Depends on what happens between it and the city.
True.
And there's only a couple of properties between it and the city.
Yeah,
So, but the thing is, the site plan actually is in process for that at the county. So we won't have
Could be
any
done.
real influence
right.
with the design of it.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
We okay to adjourn?
So move.
We are adjourned.
Next
Thank you.
week.
Thank you.